Okay, hi there. I am going to attempt to tell a story of Thanksgiving that is comprehensive and inclusive and has a good moral to the story, or at least gives us somewhere to go at the end. This is part of a series. I have tons of notes here, so just go along with me here. So we'll just start with Thanksgiving was created in the year 1863. It was inspired by a woman named Sarah Hale, a woman historian and the author of Mary Had a Little Lamb. And she had a 36-year campaign to create a national holiday of Thanksgiving. She was the editor of a women's magazine called Godoy's Ladies Book. And anyways, she wrote all the recipes, and she's the one who came up with the idea of the Pilgrims and Indians and the Puritans and the stories and the costumes. Those are all things that were created by Sarah Hale, and Lincoln created Thanksgiving in 1863 through a proclamation. Anyways, that part of the story, we're going to go a little deeper than that. To hear more about that, the next video in this series is going to be the best one to answer some of those questions. So, anyways, this event happened. I was Sarah Hale that pointed to this meeting of who we now call the Pilgrims and the Indians. This is in Plymouth, the Plymouth colony, which was on the grounds of the Patuxent Village, which was a Wampanoag village. The Wampanoag peoples are the ones that were there. The Pilgrims, quote unquote, Pilgrims, were English separatists, and they arrived in 1820 or 1620 in the winter and had a crappy winter, and definitely the natives showed them how to make it through. And feast actually happened in 1621. It lasted for 3 days, and they mainly ate venison. It was not totally sure, it was almost an accident. It seems as though they invited Maciot, who is the leader of the Wampanoag people, to come have a feast. The Hall Harvest Festival was something that was part of English culture beforehand, and so they brought them there, and they invited the chief, and it seems like maybe 90 other people from the Wampanoag tribe showed up, and they didn't have enough food. I think the turkeys were hidden away, maybe, and it was mainly men that hung out. I'm sure the women were doing some cooking in the background or something could be expected in the 1600s. And when the Wampanoag realized there wasn't enough food, they went and got 5 deers, just like in one day. So, anyways, they had a lot of venison. It seems like there's a lot of shooting of guns. And the thing that's interesting to tell about this story is that they ended up having a treaty which lasted for a while. John Bradford and Maciot, the leaders of the respective communities, actually kept a peace between them. The Wampanoag folk had some good reasons. They had other tribes they were dealing with, and vice versa. The Pilgrims or the separatists were surely had some reasons to want to hang out with other people. They landed in the wrong place in the wrong time, and it was a pretty bad experience for them getting there. So the question is, how did this happen? Because in this window of time, for again about 10 years or so, these folks were more or less able to get along across culture, across all the differences that one might have. Racism was invented just more or less about the same time. Race itself, this is beyond racism. There was a crazy, interesting cultural encounter, and what was remarkable about it, and the wisdom of Sarah Hale, was that this happened in the middle of all of this horrible encounter between the English and the native peoples of North America, or what the native people called Turtle Island. And This encounter, on the whole, was horrible. Some of the criteria of what makes something to be a genocide is you take over the religion, you take the land away, you take languages away, and you destroy cultural objects. And that surely happened on the whole. And a lot of that really happened, specifically, really started happening, at least in the Massachusetts area where the Thanksgiving was happening. Within in 1637 there was actually a horrible massacre that happened, and they killed 500, 700, 400 people, different estimates, burned them alive in their village. Um and then they also but these people were the Puritans, and the Puritans were the ones who were trying to improve the English church, and the Pilgrims were the ones who were trying to separate from the Church of England. And so, anyways, the Puritans, they came in droves. There were only 100 Pilgrims, but there are thousands and thousands of Puritans that came soon after. And that was just the beginning of how horrible things went in this part. But on the whole, the encounter between Europe and Native Americans was a horrible genocide by any way that we can measure it. So how did that happen? And what can we learn from it? Well, here's the thing that we can learn. Somehow, this story has been happening for a long time. And I like to think about it as like the conquest of like civilization over indigenous culture, or we can think about it as what I call domination culture over, or what I call earth culture. And all of us have indigenous roots. We all come from a people that were connected to the land. And all of us are carrying with us the trauma of being separated from that. And that's true for me as a white person with English, Scottish ancestry. The Romans were the first to come and conquer the indigenous peoples of England. That happened around the year zero, like the century before and the century after. And some of the few things we have documenting this was about burning down the sacred tree groves of the Druids and destroying of the Celtic culture. Overall, the Roman conquest of Europe and England, a couple million people were killed. And this was in a time when the world only had 200 million people, so it was a lot. And that trauma, that killing of the destroying of the religion and the people and the language, continued in Europe. The Romans left around like 1,000 or so, or sorry, after a number of centuries. And then the Anglo-Saxons, which were various groups from what's now Germany and Denmark, came and conquered England, and they took over the language. And then the Romans came back, and the Catholic Church dominated in England. And then the Church of England felt like it was being oppressed by the Catholic Church, and the Church of England then became the kind of rule around the 1500s and the 1600s. And this is what led the separatists to want to leave. There was a outside force, in this case coming from London, that was telling them that they couldn't pray the way they wanted, and they couldn't be in the community the way they wanted. But this also is the 1500s is the same time where the Welsh culture was being destroyed and English was being made the official language. Just a small story that I know through a wonderful indigenous historian, Lila June, told the story about how the Welsh people, if they were caught speaking the Welsh language and not English, they had to wear a log around their neck until they could find someone else who was speaking the Welsh language, and then they could put the log around their neck. And so they used shame to destroy this. And so these English folks were losing their language and their religion and their ability to freely associate, and they decided to get out of there. They first went to the Netherlands, and then realized that if they go to the new continent, they might be able to go and start fresh. And they did. They had a really horrible time getting there. One of their boats was broken, and so they spent months just getting out of the port. and then they arrived at the wrong time and they weren't ready and they didn't know what to do, and they got this help. When they arrived, the place where they set up was called Patuxent. The Patuxent Village was a Wampanoag village. The Wampanoag people had, over the previous years, lost nearly 90% of their population to diseases, smallpox, and so forth. And so there literally were bones of the dead from the village of Patuxent Village where Plymouth Colony was built. On top of those bones, there wasn't people, everyone died, they couldn't even clear the bones out of the way. So that village was built there, and it was in the basis of all of this trauma and all of this history that in a certain way got these people, despite everything, to actually get along for a little bit. And then it got really bad. It got really bad. The amount of massacres and displacement that is carried by the U.S. government and the English settlers and so forth is a horror that's like hard to even face. And what's interesting is that we all share the pain of the consequences of that. Our responsibility can be differently distributed to our ancestors, and there's a different degree to which I, for example, as an individual that has ancestors that were part of all of this, I get to find that path to healing inside myself as a gift to those ancestors. And as a country, we also get to do the healing, which becomes now a gift to our ancestors. And one thing that we can sort of lift out of all of this is that there actually was a model of what this could look like, of these people coming together across language, across culture, across religion, and actually being willing to hang out and take the risk. It wasn't the popular choice to try to connect. And, you know, and what's the other important lesson from this is that it's fragile. Derek Jensen, who's an author who writes about environmentalism, and he says that the last big great chance for humanity was the moment when the Europeans encountered the Americas. And if you think about this across the big arc of, that was a big deal. There was a chance that Europe could have met the Americas, Turtle Island, and there could have been a cultural exchange. There could have been, oh my gosh, there's people here. Let's talk and let's learn from each other and let's figure out how to grow. And it seems as though that opportunity was lost. But what I want to say is that that opportunity is still here. This story is still playing out. When the Romans conquered the Druids and the Celts, there is no history of them. Those languages are lost. Their language, they didn't write anything down, and we'll never know what's there. But the Wampanoag tribe is still here today. The native wisdom that we have, it's suppressed and oppressed and marginalized in various ways, but it's still here, and we actually still remember this. And so this story is still happening. And it's not just that it would be really nice if we all just got along, but I think that our very survival existence as ongoing existence as humanity hinges on the ability to integrate this modern, globalized, civilized world that we're in, and most people, or a lot of people, are really invested in, and the deep indigenous wisdom of earth culture. And for us to survive. And that's an interesting way to think about this Thanksgiving story. These people had to figure out how to get along with each other to survive. If we talk to these English people, those other ones won't mess with us too much. Or if we talk to these native peoples that we don't know or that we think are savages that maybe will survive. Like, we actually are going to have to get along if we're going to be able to survive. And so, in the next video, which is already recorded, so I'll put it out right away, I'm going to talk about 3 reasons why we can celebrate this Thanksgiving in ways that are traditional and honor all of this. But part of this is just being able to recognize the full history and to use the history of this incredible human experience and encounter and like the tenderness of this one rare moment to inspire us to think about, how do we want to play this story out? What kind of healing do we want to do? How can we actually heal this? What's that going to take? And yeah, so thank you for watching this video. I have I've done a lot of research about this, so if you want to go take a deep dive into the history of Thanksgiving, there's a link there to a Google Doc with a ton of different links. It's potentially will get more organized over time, but there's a lot of great resources in there. I recommend you check it out. And if you like this kind of stuff, check me out on Substack. I have a Omni-Win newsletter of sorts that you can sign up for. And I'm about to get a new podcast soon, and so stay tuned for that. All right, thank you so much for listening and for watching. Have a good day.